Hey, what's up, guys? It's Emilio from Perimeter Church. One of my all-time heroes of the faith is Mother Teresa. Now, if you don't know who Mother Teresa is, Mother Teresa was this nun who lived in a monastery in India, and she would serve the poor, she would serve lepers, and she just put them first. And I remember hearing this story, that there was this man who went to visit this monastery who wanted to see Mother Teresa. And when he went to visit, he looked down at her feet and noticed that they were deformed, that they were in many ways just broken. And so he turned to one of the other nuns and asked, well, what happened? Why are her feet this way? Was she born this way? What's going on? And this nun just kind of smiles at the man and says, well, often we give shoes to the poor, and we take donations, and what Mother Teresa would do is when donations of shoes were dropped off, she would go to them. She would be the first one to go to the shoes, and she would intentionally seek out the worst pair of shoes in the bunch, because the idea that somebody might walk out with the worst pair haunted her. So she would make sure she took the worst pair. And after years and years and years of doing that, her feet were deformed. But she never complained. She just continued to do it because that was her calling. She felt called to love people in that way. She showed incredible humility in doing that. And in these parables that I want to read today, Jesus continues to talk about humility, about what that looks like. So in Luke 14, in the first 6 verses, Jesus is dining at the house of one of the religious leaders, of one of the Pharisees. And he's already had a mini confrontation because he asked them the question. He asked them, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not? And if you read scripture, you know what the Pharisees' thoughts are on this. You know that they're not a big fan of healing on the Sabbath, especially Jesus healing on the Sabbath. But so he pulls a man aside, he heals them, and these religious leaders say nothing. Well then, starting in verse 7, he looks around and notices not only who is at the table with him, but where they're seated. So this parable, this first parable, is about where you seat yourself. So listen to the words in verses 7 through 11 of chapter 14, the book of Luke. It says, now he told a parable to those who were invited when he noticed how they chose the places of honor, saying to them, when you are invited by someone to a wedding feast, do not sit down in a place of honor, lest someone more distinguished than you be invited by him. And he who invited you both will come and say to you, give your place to this person. And then he will begin with shame to take the lowest place. So what he's doing, he's saying, listen, when you show up to a wedding, don't take the best seat, because what you don't want to happen is you don't want someone who is more honored than you are, who has a higher place in society, who has also been invited to show up, and then the host say, hey, you need to get up so they can have your seat. Jesus is saying you don't want that to happen, because then you're going to end up having to take the lowest seat. But then listen to what he says beginning in verse 10. Jesus says, but when you are invited, go and sit in the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he may say to you, friend, move up higher. Then you will be honored in the presence of all who sit at table with you. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. He's saying, instead of taking the best seat, when you show up to a wedding, take the worst seat, so that the host may come to you and exalt you and honor you, saying, dear friend, please, would you take this better seat? You see, that's how I imagine the conversation with Jesus had with Mother Teresa after she passed away. I imagine the conversation went something like, hey, Mother Teresa, you have has such a humble heart. You have served, you have loved in such a way. And I know that your natural instinct is to take this worst seat here in heaven. But I want you to take this seat instead. Take this better seat. Then he tells a second parable. And this time he's directing his attention specifically to the host. And so this is verses 12 through 14. He said also to the man who invited him, when you give a dinner or a banquet, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or rich neighbors, lest they also invite you in return and you be repaid. But when you give a feast, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind. You will be blessed because they cannot repay you, for you will be repaid at the resurrection of the just. He's looking at this man, and he's saying, hey, don't just invite your peers. Don't just invite your friends, these other religious leaders. Don't just invite your family, but invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind. Invite those who wouldn't normally be invited. What a blessing that would be. And know that they can't repay you, but that you will be repaid at the resurrection. Again, going back to this idea that Jesus shares with us in verse 11, that everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. Who are you going to be? Are you going to be the one who takes the worst so that others can have the best? Are you going to be the one who invites the blind, the poor, the lost to the table? Who are you going to be? Are you going to be like Mother Teresa and live a humble life serving him, loving others? Or are you going to be someone else? Love y'all. And I'm praying for y'all. We'll see you soon. Bye.